The man who had her removed from the ballroom had been spending her money for 14 years. He just didn't know it yet. Her name was Gloria Simmons. She was 58 years old, standing in the most expensive ballroom in Atlanta in a black server's uniform, holding a silver tray. And none of the 400 people in that room knew her name or what she had built. In 23 minutes, that would change. In 23 minutes, Dr. Amara Johnson would stand at the podium at the far end of the ballroom and say a name that had never been said publicly in 14 years, and 400 of Atlanta's most powerful people would understand all at once that the woman they had been looking through all evening was the reason any of them were standing there at all. But that was 23 minutes away. Right now, Gloria was moving through the east section of the Hartley Grand Ballroom with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 3 years and who understood the specific geography of a charity gala crowd, which organizes itself not randomly, but according to invisible hierarchies of status and connection that were as legible to someone who knew how to read them as a sight plan. She had been reading those hierarchies for 3 years, every November at this gala in this ballroom, and before that, she had been reading them for 29 years in rooms that were different in their specifics, but identical in their essential organization, which was the organization of power. Who had it and who wanted it, and who was performing indifference to it, and who had decided, after enough time, that the performance was no longer worth the energy it required. She was in that last category. She had arrived there 6 years ago, not as a defeat and not as a retreat, but as a decision, the specific decision of someone who has done the thing the world expected of them for long enough to know that the expectation was only one possible organizing principle, and that there were others, and that the others were worth exploring before the exploring became impossible. As though it had always existed and would always exist, and was simply the correct arrangement of the world. She had thought about this the way she thought about all rooms, which was as a set of choices made by specific people at specific moments, and choices made by specific people could be chosen differently by different people. And that was where the interesting question began. The ballroom of the Hartley Grand Hotel in Atlanta, Georgia, had been built in 1922 by a man who had made his fortune in textiles and who had wanted to build something that would outlast the fortune, which it had done, the building surviving the textile business and the Depression, and 2 renovations and a decade as office space before being returned to its original purpose in 2004 by people who understood what it had always been trying to be. The floors were Italian marble. The walls were paneled in mahogany polished to a depth that made the light seem to come from inside the wood rather than from the chandeliers above. There were flowers on every surface, white and gold, arranged by someone who understood that the purpose of a floral arrangement in a room like this one was not to announce itself, but to complete a room that was already making a very specific statement about itself and about the people it was built for. Gloria had noticed all of this on her first night 3 years ago, and had thought about what it meant that so much money and attention had been spent making a room feel inevitable. The Simmons Foundation had been established in 2010, which was 6 months after her husband James died at his desk on a Tuesday morning in October. He had worked at Grady Memorial Hospital for 22 years as an administrator, and he had done it in the specific way of someone who has chosen a vocation rather than a career, which is to say with the full weight of himself applied to it every day without reservation and without the internal accounting that people who are performing commitment rather than feeling it require. James Simmons had grown up in a neighborhood where the gap between having insurance and being able to use it was not an abstraction, but a wall, a daily, specific wall that he had watched his family run into, and that he had decided at 19 years old he was going to spend his life trying to dismantle from the inside. He had done it. He had spent 22 years doing it, and he had made a real and measurable difference, and then on a Tuesday morning in October, he had died at his desk with his reading glasses on and a coffee cup that was still warm. She had found him. She had sat across from him for a while before she called anyone, because she needed that time, the time to say goodbye in the way that 35 years together earns you, which is completely and quietly and without witnesses. She had held his hand and she had said what needed to be said, and then she had made the calls, and after the calls had come the months, which were the hardest months of a life that had not been short of hard months. After 6 months she had done 2 things. She had left her practice, which was corporate law, where she had worked for 29 years and which had given her the financial position to do what came next without asking anyone's permission or waiting for anyone's approval. And she had set up the foundation. She had done it with the same thoroughness she had applied to everything in her professional life, which was the thoroughness of someone for whom the details are where the intention either lives or dies. She had structured it to last. She had funded it at a level that would sustain it indefinitely, and she had made the anonymity absolute from the first day, not for any reason that was strategic, not for tax efficiency or liability, or any calculation that some donors bring to anonymity. She had made it anonymous because of James, and because of what James had believed across 22 years about where the credit for anything good that happened belonged, which was with the people the work was done for, not the people doing it. For 11 years she had run it from a small office on Peachtree Street, through a board that knew her, a staff of 4 who kept her confidence with the loyalty of people who understood why it mattered, and an executive director who had been told the full story in her first month, and who had received it with the specific gravity of someone who has been trusted with something that is not hers to decide what to do with, but is hers to protect completely. The foundation had provided medical access programming to over 60,000 residents of underserved Atlanta communities across 14 years. It had funded 3 community health clinics. It had supported the training of 214 community health workers. It had partnered with 6 hospital systems on programs designed to address the specific gap James had spent his career fighting, the gap between theoretically having access to care and actually being able to use it in the specific daily reality of a life. The gala raised $3 to $4 million each year and had grown across 9 years under the chairmanship of Philip Hartley, who had taken the role from his father, a man of genuine philanthropic conviction, the specific conviction of someone for whom the giving was the thing and the recognition was irrelevant. Philip had inherited the title and the social capital that came with it and had brought to the role his own qualities, which were real, which were not his father's, and which were not nothing. He was organized and well-connected. He understood which donors responded to which approaches, how to seat a room, how to move through a charity gala crowd in a way that produced the maximum number of upgraded giving commitments with the minimum number of perceived asks. He had grown the gala in each of his 9 years as chairman, which was a real achievement that no one disputed. What he had not done, in 9 years, was wonder very much about the people who were not at his table. This was not cruelty. It was a trained blindness, the specific blindness of someone who has grown up in rooms where the people serving were understood as part of the room's function rather than part of the room's community, and who had never encountered a sufficient reason to see it differently. Gloria had observed this about him from her first night 3 years ago and had thought about it the way she thought about design problems, which was with patience and without judgment and with the intention of understanding it completely. The uniform she wore was black, with a small gold insignia on the left collar. She had added below it a compass rose pin that James had given her in 1993 on their 10th wedding anniversary, because she believed that everything a person wore should say something true about them. And the pin said she had a sense of direction. It said she had been pointed, across 58 years of a life that had taken turns she had not anticipated, by something more reliable than circumstance or the expectations of rooms. Marcus Webb was 26 years old and had been working at the Hartley Grand Hotel for 8 months. He had been assigned to the gala by Patricia Chen, the events coordinator, because he was reliable and quick, and because Patricia had learned, across 15 years of managing events, that reliability and quickness were the 2 qualities that mattered most when the guests had paid more than $500 per plate, and the margin for error was what it was. He had grown up in Vine City, which was one of the Atlanta neighborhoods that the Simmons Foundation health workers visited every Tuesday and Thursday. He had known the name Simmons Foundation from the time he was 12 years old, when a community health worker had identified an undiagnosed cardiac condition in his younger brother during a free screening at the community center on Donald Lee Hollowell Parkway. His brother's name was Isaiah. Isaiah was 23 years old now, studying electrical engineering at Georgia State, and had a heart that worked the way a heart was supposed to work because someone hired by a foundation whose name Marcus had heard, but whose founder he had never known, had been at a folding table on a Thursday afternoon 12 years ago and had known what to look for. Marcus did not know who had paid for that doctor at that table on that afternoon. He was about to find out. Patricia Chen had been coordinating events at the Hartley Grand for 15 years and had managed 37 galas and 1,100 events of varying scale, and had developed, across those 15 years, the specific gift of someone who manages complicated human arrangements for a living, which was the ability to anticipate problems before they announced themselves. She had put Gloria in the East section because Gloria moved through crowds the way the work required, which was efficiently and without requiring the crowd to accommodate her. The East section was the highest status section, organized by the invisible gravity of the gala, the heaviest weight being Philip Hartley and the mass of donors and connections orbiting him. It required someone who could move in density without disruption, who was comfortable in their body in a crowd, who found the path the crowd had not yet closed without asking the crowd to open. Patricia had made this assignment in 30 seconds based on 3 years of pattern recognition. It was the correct assignment. The incident happened at 9:47. Patricia knew the time because she looked at her watch the moment she heard the sound of glass near marble, which was a sound she had trained herself to respond to across 15 years of events where glass near marble was the opening note of something that needed to be handled before it became something larger and more public and more expensive to resolve. She looked toward the East section. The radius of attention around the group told her what she needed to know. What had happened was this. Philip Hartley was speaking to a donor named Gregory Walsh, a real estate developer who gave $40,000 a year and who Philip needed at $60,000 next year. He was making a point about state politics with the gestural emphasis of someone who has spent long enough being the most interesting person at a table that his gestures have expanded to fill the space his certainty creates around him. The gesture swept outward and came back. The return arc caught the outer edge of Gloria's tray at its midpoint. The tray did not fall. Gloria's grip was sufficient to prevent that, but 2 of the 8 glasses, the ones at the outer edge nearest his arm, tipped, and the champagne went where physics directed it, which was across the upper sleeve of the woman standing to Gloria's left. Her name was Catherine Beaumont. The dress had cost $6,000, and the champagne was immediate and irreversible, and there was no ambiguity about what had happened. Her name was Catherine Beaumont. The dress had cost $6,000, and the champagne was immediate and irreversible, and there was no ambiguity about what had happened. Catherine made a sound. Brief and involuntary, the sound of unexpected information received through the body before the mind has time to interpret it. The sound was sufficient to create a radius of attention around the group. In a quiet room, that radius would have been large. In a room with a jazz quartet playing texture rather than melody, it extended to the 20 people nearest the incident. 20 people in that section was sufficient. That section was where the witnessing mattered most in the specific social economy of a charity gala. Philip Hartley looked at the champagne on Catherine Beaumont's sleeve. He looked at Gloria. He said in the voice of someone managing an inconvenience rather than responding to a situation, the voice of performed patience at the place where it is nearly finished performing, really. His face had the expression of someone who is maintaining composure as a demonstration of restraint, which is a different thing from actually feeling restrained, and the difference is detectable by anyone who is paying attention. Catherine spoke to him in a low voice Gloria could not hear. He said to Gloria, "Can you get someone for Mrs. Beaumont?" Gloria said, of course, set the tray on the nearest surface, and moved toward the event staff station near the east entrance where the cleaning supplies were kept. She was 3 steps away when Philip spoke again. His voice had found the edge it had been managing away from. He said, "This is exactly what happens when you don't pay attention to what you're doing." The 20 people in the radius heard it. Some of them looked away, which is its own kind of looking, a form of witnessing that does not want to be seen witnessing. Catherine Beaumont had the expression of someone who has found herself part of a scene she did not intend and is calculating the least complicated exit. Gregory Walsh studied his drink with the thoroughness of someone who has found something extremely interesting in it. Philip turned back to Gregory and restored the conversation to its previous register. Gloria stopped. She did not turn around immediately. She stood for a moment with her back to the group, which was not a performance of anything, but was the natural pause of someone who has received something and is deciding what to do with it. She had taken this pause in harder places across 58 years. She had learned in those years that the quality of the response depended on the quality of the space between receiving and responding, and the space was worth protecting. She turned. She looked at Philip Hartley, not with challenge and not with submission and not with the performance of deference that the moment and the uniform seemed to be requesting. She looked at him with the expression of someone making an accurate record of something they intend to keep. Her attention, at its full capacity, was a specific and complete thing, and she directed it at him briefly, and he did not register it because he was no longer looking at her, which was its own kind of information. She said, "I'll take care of Mrs. Beaumont right away." Her voice was level and contained nothing additional. She went to the station and came back with soda water and a cloth and addressed the champagne on Catherine's sleeve with the competence of someone who has handled things that were harder than this. Catherine said thank you with the specific gratitude of someone who is partly apologizing for something they are not responsible for, and who knows they are not responsible and knows they are apologizing anyway. She returned to the service station and loaded a new tray. Marcus was there refilling his own. He looked at her with the look of someone who has witnessed something and wants to acknowledge it without making it larger than it needs to be, which is a quality of consideration that not everyone has, and that she had noticed in him from the beginning of the season. "You all right?" he said. She said yes. He said, "I saw what happened. It was his arm." She said, "I know." He said, "It's not right." She looked at him evenly. "You all right?" he said. She said yes. He said, "I saw what happened. It was his arm." She said, "I know." He said, "It's not right." She looked at him evenly. "It isn't," she said. He nodded. They went back to the floor. She carried the new tray with the same efficiency and the same quality of attention to the specific geography of the crowd, the same capacity for being fully in the work without being only in the work. What she was thinking about, as she moved through the east section, was not the incident and not Philip Hartley. She was thinking about a conversation she had had 6 months ago with Dr. Amara Johnson, which had begun with a question she had been avoiding for a year. Dr. Amara Johnson was 35 years old and the Foundation's executive director. She had come to the Simmons Foundation from a public health research position at Emory, where she had been working on a study of medical access in underserved urban communities, a portion of which had been funded by a Simmons Foundation grant. She had not known, when she applied for the executive director role, whose foundation it was. She had learned in her first month, and she had kept it the way she kept everything important. She had received the information about the founder with a long silence, and then a single question, which was, "Why does nobody know?" Gloria had explained, and Dr. Johnson had listened with the full attention of someone receiving information she intends to carry accurately, and she had asked no more questions that day, and she had not raised the subject again for 2.5 years. And when she raised it, she did so gently, with the full weight of her affection for the work behind the gentleness. She had said that the foundation was at a point in its development where the anonymity had become a limitation, not for her, not for the staff, not for the community programs, which ran on the quality of the people running them, and would continue to run on that quality, regardless of what anyone knew about the founder. For the bigger work, the hospital system partnerships, the rooms where decisions were made about what the foundation was and what it could become. The anonymity was creating a gap where the founder's authority should have been standing. She had said, and she said it with the specific honesty of someone who knows they are saying something the other person has not fully decided about, and who is saying it anyway, because the difficulty is not a reason to avoid the truth that the people in the ballroom at the gala should know. Not for recognition, not for any reason that was about Gloria, because knowing changes something. It changes what a room thinks it is doing and who it believes it is doing it for, and that change matters. Gloria had thought about this for 6 months. She had thought about James and what he would say about it. She had thought about the reasons the anonymity had been right at the beginning, which were still real reasons, and about whether those reasons still outweighed the reasons on the other side, which were also real. She had arrived, slowly and without drama, at an answer. 3 weeks ago she had called Dr. Johnson and said, "I'm ready, you can announce at the gala." and the call had been made and the evening had begun. Philip Hartley found Patricia Chen near the service entrance at 9:48. Patricia saw him coming from 30 feet away and read his posture and expression before he reached her, which told her what the conversation was going to be about before he opened his mouth. He said he needed to speak with her about the East Section server, the dark-haired one. Patricia said she was aware there had been a situation. He said, "I'd like her reassigned for the dinner service, somewhere away from the East Section." He said, "Perhaps the outdoor terrace." The outdoor terrace assignment removed a server from the main floor for the full 2-hour dinner service, which included the keynote presentation. Patricia received this request in the way of someone who has received many such requests across 15 years and who has developed, across those years, a very specific and private relationship with them. She said she would see what she could arrange. She said it in the neutral way that left the decision unresolved. He thanked her and returned to the room. Patricia received this request in the way of someone who has received many such requests across 15 years and who has developed, across those years, a very specific and private relationship with them. She said she would see what she could arrange. She said it in the neutral way that left the decision unresolved. He thanked her and returned to the room. She found Gloria near the service station on the south wall. She told her about the terrace directly, because directness was how she told people things, and she believed directness was the most respectful available option in professional situations, especially when what was being communicated was something the other person had not asked for. Gloria listened. She said, "Can I ask you something?" Patricia said yes. Gloria said, "What time is the keynote?" Patricia said 9:55. Gloria was quiet. The keynote was in 8 minutes. Patricia watched the quiet. It had more in it than quiet usually has. It was the quiet of someone who has been given a piece of information and who already knows what to do with it. Gloria said, "I need to stay on the main floor until after the keynote." Patricia looked at her steadily. She said she understood that might not be possible given the request that had just been made. Gloria said, "I know." She paused. "I'd like to stay anyway." The pause was both a request and a statement, and the statement was the larger of the two. Patricia looked at her steadily. She said she understood that might not be possible given the request that had just been made. Gloria said, "I know." She paused. "I'd like to stay anyway." The pause was both a request and a statement, and the statement was the larger of the two. Patricia said, "I'll let Mr. Hartley know the terrace assignment will begin after the keynote." Gloria said, "Thank you." Patricia went back to her work, but some part of her attention stayed with the conversation, with the specific weight of what the pause had contained and what she had decided in response to it. The way some conversations stay with you, because there is something in them you have not yet fully named, but that you know you will eventually need to name, and that you intend to. Marcus positioned himself near the south wall at 9:51, 4 minutes before the keynote. Not because the work required it, because he had been watching the room all evening, and he had watched Gloria watching the room, and he had learned across 8 months of working beside her that the things she paid attention to were worth paying attention to. He stood near the south wall with his tray and watched the stage and watched Gloria and waited for whatever the room was preparing to do. Dr. Amara Johnson walked to the podium at 9:54. She was wearing a deep blue dress, and she had the bearing of someone who has stood at many podiums and has arrived, across those many podiums, at the understanding that what you bring to a podium matters more than what you do once you are there. She waited for the room to settle. The room settled. She said good evening, and the room responded to it the way rooms respond to someone who means what they say. She said that the Simmons Foundation had been in Atlanta for 14 years. She said what those 14 years had produced. She said the names of the 3 community health clinics. She said the number of community health workers trained, 214. She said the number of hospital partnerships, and what those partnerships had produced in terms of people who had received care they would not otherwise have accessed. She said 60,000 people. She said these things in the plain language of someone for whom the numbers are the lives they represent, and not abstractions above them. And then she said, "And this has been the work of one person, the person who founded this foundation 14 years ago. who has funded it at a level that most people in this room would find surprising, who has chosen, until tonight, to remain entirely unknown, who has decided for the first time to be in this room not in the way she has been in it for 3 years, but as what she actually is, which is the founder of the Simmons Foundation and the most important person in this building tonight. The room held very still. The quality of stillness in a large room is different from the quality of stillness in a small one, because the size of the room gives the stillness volume, gives it presence, gives it the specific weight of many people holding the same breath at the same moment. The Hartley Grand Ballroom held its breath for 2 full seconds after Dr. Johnson stopped speaking. 400 still faces, the chandeliers throwing their light across all of it. Then she said the name, Gloria Simmons. She said it twice because once was not sufficient for a name that had been waiting 14 years to be said in this room. And then she said, "Please join me in welcoming the woman who made everything I have described possible, who is in this room right now and who has something she would like to say to all of you." The room changed the way rooms change when the information arriving overturns everything the room believed it knew about itself. Philip Hartley was at the table of honor, the table nearest the stage. He heard the name, he heard the room react. He looked toward the south wall where there was movement, and he registered the walk before he registered the face, and then he registered the face, and then he sat very still. It was the face from 947, the face from the east section, the face of the person he had instructed Patricia Chen to reassign to the terrace for the remainder of the evening. The uniform was gone. She had changed in the 8 minutes between the conversation with Patricia and the start of the program in the employee changing room on the 2nd floor, into clothes she had brought in a bag left in her car. Not the clothes of a donor arriving to be seen arriving, the clothes of someone going somewhere to tell the truth, which is its own kind of dressing, and which requires a different kind of attention than dressing to perform. Dark blazer, white shirt, simply correct. Not expensive looking in a way that announced expense. The clothes of someone for whom the question of what to wear had been settled long ago by an understanding of who they were, and the understanding had nothing to do with what rooms expected. She walked toward the stage, and the room applauded, and the applause built in the specific way it builds when a room is feeling something it did not know it was going to feel when the evening started. Marcus Webb was near the south wall when she began to walk. He understood what was happening in stages, the name and then the walk and then the face, and then the accumulated weight of 8 months of paying close attention to a person who had turned out to be someone he had been watching without knowing what he was watching. The understanding arrived all at once, and then more arrived behind it, and he stood very still with his tray and did not try to manage what his face was doing. He thought about Isaiah. He thought about the Thursday afternoon at the community center 12 years ago. He thought about the folding table and the doctor and the free screening and the diagnosis that had been made by a foundation whose founder was now walking across the marble floor of the Hartley Grand Ballroom toward a podium while 400 people applauded and the chandeliers threw their light across everything, and the November night waited outside the tall windows. Patricia Chen was near the service entrance, checking the timing for the dessert course when she heard the name. She stopped checking the timing. She looked toward the floor. She thought about the pause near the south wall and what it had contained and what she had decided in response to it. And she thought about 15 years of event management and all the things she had witnessed in those 15 years, about how rooms treat the people moving through them carrying trays. She watched Gloria walk to the stage. Gloria looked at the room from the podium. 400 people, most of whom she had observed from the specific perspective of someone carrying a tray, which is a perspective that gives you a complete and honest picture of a room that is different from, and in some ways more accurate than the picture available from inside the circle of tables. She had been building this picture for 3 years. She knew this room. She was not afraid of it. She said good evening, and the room was completely quiet. She said it in the voice she had always had, the voice of a woman who had spent 35 years in rooms where her voice was required to carry without amplification, and who had learned in those years that the carrying came not from volume, but from clarity. She said she wanted to say something brief because the work was more important than the person doing it, and she intended to keep it that way. She said that she was there to thank them, that their support had made the work larger than she could have made it alone. She said that the foundation had been James's idea. in the way that things you do in the name of someone you have lost are always their idea, even when you are the one who does them. She said his name, and the room held it. She said she had been in this room for 3 years, and had seen it from an angle that most people in it had not seen it from, and that what she had seen from that angle was generosity, real generosity, given by people who understood what resources were for. She said she hoped she had been a good steward of what they had given. She paused, and then she said one more thing. She said she hoped they would remember, going forward, that the people moving through rooms with trays were people with the full complexity of people. She left it at that without elaboration, because some things are better said once and plainly than explained into something smaller than they are. She stepped back from the podium. The room applauded, and the applause had in it something that applause at charity galas rarely has. Philip Hartley applauded. He did it because not applauding would have been conspicuous, but that was not the only reason. He applauded because something in him, the part his father had managed to pass on despite everything else, was responding to something real, and he had not entirely lost the reflex of responding to real things with real gestures. And he was thinking, while his hands moved, about 9:47 p.m. and the specific quality of his voice when he said what he had said. He was thinking about the 20 people in the radius, and about the champagne on Catherine's sleeve, and about the particular tone he had used, which was the tone of someone removing an obstacle, correcting a malfunction, managing a disruption, and which had been directed at the woman who had been funding the event he had chaired for 9 years. He sat with this thought through the dinner service. He did not find a way to put it somewhere more comfortable. He allowed it to stay where it was. Dr. Johnson found him during the dinner. She came to his table without a reproach and without an agenda, with the simple directness of someone who has something to say and believes in saying it. She said she wanted him to know that Gloria had been aware of his request to reassign her. He said yes. A long pause. He said, "I owe her an apology." Dr. Johnson looked at him. She said, "Yes, you do." She did not offer to facilitate it. She left it at his feet and let him decide what to do with it. Marcus found Gloria at the service station during the dinner, when she was helping reset trays for the dessert course, which was the work available, and she was in it. He stood beside her. He had been not certain what to say for 40 minutes, cycling through the options and finding none of them sufficient to the moment. He said her name. She looked at him. He said, "The Simmons Foundation, the community health workers," and then he said his brother's name. He said it in the specific way of someone reporting rather than explaining, giving information rather than performing feeling. She listened without moving or speaking while he talked. He told her about Vine City and the community center, and the Thursday afternoon and the folding table, and the free screening, and what had been found and what had been done, and what Isaiah was doing now, which was studying electrical engineering at Georgia State, and having a heart that worked the way a heart was supposed to work. When he finished, she looked at him for a long moment. She said, "What is his name?" He said, "Isaiah." She repeated it once, quietly, the way you say a name back when you are making sure you have it correctly and intend to keep it. She said, "Tell me about him." And he did. Standing at the service station during the dessert course of the Simmons Foundation annual gala, Marcus Webb told Gloria Simmons about his brother, who was 23 years old and had a working heart and a degree he was almost finished earning. When he finished, she said, "Your brother is exactly what this is for." She said it simply the way she said things that were true, without embellishment, because the truth did not require it. He received it the way you receive something true about something you have been carrying for a long time, which is with a completeness that needs no further response, and the completeness was in his face, and he did not try to manage it. She said, "Keep watching the rooms you're in, Marcus. You see things. That matters." Then she went back to work. He went back to work. The dessert course continued, and the room ate and talked and did what rooms of 400 people at charity galas do in their final hours, which has become gradually less formal and more honest and more tired and more themselves. And 2 people in black uniforms moved through it with trays, and the room's attention went to them and through them and past them in the way that rooms direct their attention when they have not been given a reason to change the direction. Philip found Gloria near the end of the evening, when the room was in its final phase. the long lingering goodbye of rooms that have been something for a few hours and are slowly becoming empty. He came to where she was working without the social machinery he usually deployed for conversations that had any difficulty in them. He came plainly. He said, "Mrs. Simmons." She turned. He said, "I owe you an apology." And his voice was different. It was the voice underneath the other one, the one with less performance and more person. He said, "I said something to you tonight that was unkind and wrong, and I said it in front of people, and I am sorry for that." He held her gaze while he said it, which was the right thing to do, the necessary thing, because an apology offered while looking away is not an apology, but a discharge. She looked at him with the full completeness of her attention, which was not unkind, but was not comfortable, because it saw clearly, and what it saw had to be received clearly by the person it was seeing. She said, "I appreciate that." She said it without cushioning, which meant he received the full weight of it, which was heavier than he had expected because it was given without ceremony. He stood with the weight. Then he said, "May I ask you something?" She said yes. He said, "You've been here 3 years. Working this room." He paused. "I want to understand why." She looked at him steadily. She said, "Because the work is in the room. All of it. I wanted to know what it looked like from inside." He was quiet. She said, "I learned a great deal." He said, "What did you learn?" She thought about the room, the chandeliers and the mahogany and the marble and the people in their final conversations. She said, "I learned that the room is a good room, that the people in it mostly mean what they mean when they give." She paused. "And I learned that the people who move through it with trays are often invisible to the people sitting in it, and that the invisibility is a habit, and that habits can be changed." He said, "I would like to do better." She said, "I know." He said, "Is there something I can do that would matter?" She said, "Yes." She said, "Learn the names." He looked at her. She said, "The service staff. All of them. Not as a gesture, as a practice. As something you do every time because they are people in the room and they are the room the same way you are the room." He was quiet for a long moment. She said, "James would start there." He said, "Who was James?" She said, "My husband." The man whose idea this was, he said, "I'll start there." She nodded. "There." Patricia found Gloria near the employee exit at the end of the evening. She was in her work clothes again, the uniform, the compass rose pin on the collar. Patricia said her name and she stopped. Patricia said, "I have been managing events at this hotel for 15 years. She paused. "I've seen a great many things in those 15 years. Gloria waited. Patricia said, "The 23 minutes between the incident and the keynote, the way you carried those 23 minutes, that is one of the most impressive things I have witnessed in a professional context." Gloria looked at her. She said, "Patricia." Patricia said yes. Gloria said, "What is the name of the server who would have been on the outdoor terrace tonight if I hadn't asked to stay?" Patricia thought for a moment. She said, "Daniel. He's been here 4 years, has 2 daughters, one of the most dependable people on my staff." Gloria said, "Good. That's good to know." She said it in the way of someone who is genuinely glad to have a piece of information, which she was. She said good evening and walked into the Atlanta night. She drove home along Cascade Road. The radio stayed off because the drive home was always without the radio, because the drive home was where she thought through what had happened and what it meant and where it was going, and she needed the quiet for that, the way she needed the quiet for most things that mattered. The city moved past outside the windows in the way that cities move past at midnight, going about the ongoing business of being a city, indifferent and constant and entirely itself. She thought about the room and the 400 people in it, and what they had received and what they would do with it. She had spent 14 years not being able to know what the giving produced beyond a certain point, and she had made peace with this, the way you make peace with something that is true and unchangeable, which is by accepting the truth completely and then continuing anyway, because the continuing was the thing and the outcome was not hers to control. She thought about Marcus and Isaiah and the folding table on the Thursday afternoon in Vine City, and she thought about the chain of specific decisions and specific people that had produced a 23-year-old with a working heart at Georgia State, studying electrical engineering. She thought about the chain extending forward, about Isaiah graduating and entering the world with what he had been given, about Marcus watching rooms with the full attention of someone who had understood that watching mattered. She thought about Philip Hartley and the apology, and the specific quality of the voice it had been said in, which was the voice underneath the usual one. She thought about James's test for apologies, which was not the saying but the doing, and the doing took time, and the time was where the truth of the apology either revealed itself or revealed its absence. She had given Philip the beginning. What he did with the beginning was his to decide. She had done what she was for. She thought about Dr. Johnson and the hospital partnerships and what those partnerships would produce, the programs and the reach and the specific narrowing of the specific gap James had spent 22 years fighting. She felt the work waiting for her, the way she had always felt it, not as a weight but as a presence, the presence of something that needed her continued attention and that she was glad, across all of it, to be needed by. She pulled into the driveway of the house on Cascade Road. She sat in the car for a moment with the engine off and the November night around her, and the quiet of a residential street at midnight, the specific quiet of a neighborhood at rest that was never fully at rest because a city is never fully at rest. She went inside. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table where they had eaten 32 years of meals, where the important conversations had happened, where the check had been placed one evening, and James had said, "Well, Dorothy, what do we do with this?" She thought about the 3 years of working the gala, and about what the 3 years had given her, that the previous 11 years of running the foundation from outside the room had not given her, which was the inside. The actual human texture of what happened when the money that she and James had decided to give met the need it was supposed to meet, not at the level of numbers and reports and grant summaries, but at the level of the room itself, the people in it, the specific weight of the work being done. She thought about what James would say about tonight. She thought she could hear him, in the way you hear the people you have loved long enough that their voice has become part of the internal voice you use to check your thinking. She thought he would say that the 3 years had been worth it, and that the next part was also going to be worth it, and that the worth of things is usually not visible until you are already inside them, which is the nature of the worth of things that matter. She thought he would say Isaiah the way she had said it, repeating the name to Marcus with the intention of keeping it. James had kept names. He had kept the names of everyone he worked with at Grady Memorial for 22 years, of everyone who came through the hospital, of everyone he met in the rooms where the work happened. He had kept them because the names were people, and people were the point, and the point was the reason for every other thing. She finished her tea. She went to bed. She did not lie awake. She had spent 58 years learning the difference between the things that required her wakefulness and the things that did not. And this was a night that did not, because everything that had needed to happen had happened, and everything that needed to happen next would happen in the morning in the ordinary forward motion of the work. She slept the sleep of someone who is moving in the right direction and knows it. Amara Johnson drove home to her apartment in Midtown. She lived on the 14th floor with a view of downtown Atlanta that she had stopped seeing the way you stop seeing things you encounter every day. Tonight she stood at the window for a long time. She thought about what it meant to do something for 14 years without asking to be known for it, and what that produced in a person, and whether what it produced was loss or gain or something that was neither, its own category entirely. She had known the facts for 4 years, the practice and the foundation and the patent and James and the 6 months of grief and the specific decision made at a kitchen table. She had known the facts and had respected them and had worked within them every day, but tonight she had seen something that was not in the facts, which was the quality of the carrying. The way a person carries something for 14 years in a room where no one knows they are carrying it and continues to do the work while carrying it. That quality was not in any document. It was in the 23 minutes between the incident and the podium. It was in the new tray loaded at the service station after the incident, the work continuing with the same quality it had had before. Without the energy of anticipation that most people bring to a situation, they know they are about to turn around. Gloria had simply worked. She had done the work in front of her, and the moment had arrived in the natural way that moments arrive when you are not forcing them. This was what Amara wanted to understand, how a person becomes that, what it requires and what it costs and what it builds in the person who sustains it. She thought about 4 years of working beside someone who had never once behaved as though the knowing changed anything about Amara's authority to do the work, who had been fully present in every meeting and every decision and every difficulty. Without pulling rank, she had every right to pull. She turned off the light at the window and went to bed. She thought before she slept about the next year, the hospital partnerships now possible, the expanded reach, the things the Foundation would be able to do in rooms where the full weight of the founder's story could finally be in the conversation. She thought, I work for the right person. She had thought this before many times. Tonight she knew it in a different way, which was from the inside of what it meant, where the knowing was most complete. Marcus drove home to Vine City. He passed the community center on Donald Lee Hollowell Parkway, which he passed twice a day in both directions, and tonight he passed it with something additional in the knowing of it, which was the face and the name of the woman whose decision had funded what the building held on a Thursday afternoon 12 years ago. He parked. He called Isaiah. It was past midnight, but this was not a night that qualified for normal midnight restraint. Isaiah answered on the third ring, the voice of someone adjusting from sleep to wakefulness, and Marcus said hey and said he needed to tell him something and told him. He told him about the gala and the uniform and the name said from the podium and the conversation at the service station, and the way she had said Isaiah once quietly, with the intention of keeping the name. He told it accurately and in sequence and without theater, because that was how he told things. Isaiah was quiet for a while after Marcus finished. Then he said, the Simmons Foundation. The same one, the community center. Marcus said yes. The silence between them on the phone after that had the specific quality of two brothers on either end of a piece of information that is too large for the available language, and that neither of them was going to try to force into language, because forcing would have diminished it, and neither of them was willing to diminish it. Then Isaiah said, Marcus, I want to do something with this, not just with the degree, with this. I want to work in the communities, in the neighborhoods, in the gap that she is trying to close. I want to work there with what I know. Marcus said, the work is there waiting for you. Isaiah said, tell her. When you see her, tell her that. Marcus said he would. They talked for another hour because the phone was the room where the real conversations happened, and the real conversations needed the time they needed. When they hung up, Marcus sat in the car and looked at the community center at the end of the block. He thought about the chain of specific decisions that had produced this specific night. Someone deciding to give. Someone deciding to fund a health worker. A health worker at a folding table on a Thursday. A 7-year-old's brother going to a free screening, a diagnosis, a referral. 23 years old at Georgia State. A future engineer. A woman in a black server's uniform watching a room from the inside of it. He thought about what he was going to do with what he now knew. He had been trying to figure this out for 26 years, what to do with who he was and where he had come from, and what he saw in the rooms he was in. Tonight, something had shifted. Not completely, not in the way of the complete shifts that announce themselves loudly. In the way of the beginning of a shift, the first movement of something heavy that has been in one place for a long time, and that finally, quietly, begins to move. He went upstairs. He lay in the dark. He thought about Gloria Simmons at the kitchen table on Cascade Road, which he had never seen but which he imagined correctly in the way of someone who has been paying close attention to a person for long enough to understand something about the life that produced them. He thought she was probably still there. He thought she was probably thinking about the work. He thought he understood now what he wanted his life to be organized around, and that was the last thought before he slept. 3 weeks later, a community health worker named Sandra Reeves was at a folding table in the community center on Donald Lee Hollowell Parkway in Vine City, conducting free health screenings on a Thursday afternoon. She had been doing this every Tuesday and Thursday for 4 years. She had identified in those 4 years dozens of undiagnosed conditions that had been referred to care that would not otherwise have been accessible. She set up her table at 1 o'clock the way she always did, because the always was the point. On this particular Thursday, a woman came in with her 7-year-old granddaughter, who had been experiencing occasional dizziness and shortness of breath during physical activity. Sandra screened the child with the thoroughness and care of someone who knows what she is looking for and who takes the looking seriously. She found something that warranted a referral. She made the referral. She gave the grandmother the name and contact information of the specialist and explained that the fee would be covered by the Community Health Fund. The grandmother said, "How much will this cost us?" Sandra said, "Nothing, it's what we're here for." The grandmother held the referral paper in both hands for a moment. She said, "How is this possible?" Sandra said, "There are people who believe that this is what resources are for." The grandmother nodded. She thanked Sandra and took her granddaughter home. Sandra cleaned the table and prepared for the next person. The afternoon continued. The Thursday proceeded. The ordinary work of the inside of the room went on, as it always went on. Gloria did not know about this particular Thursday or this particular child. She was in her office on Peachtree Street, reviewing a grant report. She was not supposed to know the individual cases. The privacy of the people the foundation served was more important than her awareness of any particular story. She did not need to know every story. She knew the work was happening. She knew it the way you know something you built from the inside, with the specific knowledge of someone who made the decision and has spent 14 years watching what the decision produces. She knew that somewhere in Atlanta on any given Thursday afternoon, there was a folding table and a person who knew what to look for. She knew it without needing to observe any particular instance of it. The knowing was the thing James had always had. The knowing that the work was going on even when he was not in the specific room where it was going on. The trust in the people doing it. The trust that was not passive, but was the active product of 14 years of building something carefully enough that it deserved to be trusted. 3 weeks after the gala, she sat at the head of the conference table on Peachtree Street, with the Simmons Foundation Board and the representatives of 3 hospital systems who had been waiting for the partnership conversation that the full weight of the founder's identity could now make possible. She had been sitting at this table for 14 years. The table was the same. The work was the same. Her name was on the door now, which was the only thing that had changed, and it changed the room in ways that were real. The hospital representatives were thorough. They had done their research. They came with the right questions, which was itself information about the quality of the potential partnership, because the quality of the questions a potential partner asks tells you something fundamental about whether they have done the work of understanding what they are entering into. She answered each question directly. The conversation moved towards something, which is the direction good conversations go when both sides are serious about where they are going. At the end of the meeting, the lead representative, a physician named Dr. William Osee, who had practiced internal medicine in Atlanta for 28 years, said he wanted to ask something outside the agenda. She said, "Go ahead." He said, "I was at Grady for 20 years. James Simmons was one of the finest administrators I ever worked with." She looked at him. He said, "I want you to know that what you've built in his name is the thing he would have built if he'd had the resources and the time." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know," he said. "Does that help?" She said, "Every day," he nodded. The meeting concluded. The partnership was moving forward. She walked out of the building and into the afternoon, which was Atlanta in late fall, clear and mild. The light coming in at the low angle of the season and making the ordinary surfaces of things look considered, look like they had been thought about, which is what the right light does to any surface it touches honestly. She drove home. She sat at the kitchen table with tea and the quiet of Cascade Road at the end of the afternoon. She thought about the next year and the year after, and the work entering its next phase, the hospital partnerships and the expanded reach, and the new things that would become possible, now that the full weight of the Foundation's story could be present in the rooms where decisions were being made about the Foundation's future. She thought about Philip Hartley. She had not heard from him in the 3 weeks since the gala, which was a short time for someone to do the work of changing a habit that had been forming for 50 years. She did not expect immediacy. She had learned across 58 years that people do things at their own pace and that the pace is not the measure of the doing. The doing is the measure. She was willing to wait for the doing because the doing was the point. She thought about Marcus and about what he had said at the service station and about Isaiah. She thought about what Marcus was going to do with what he had. She had been watching him for 3 years, the way she watched things that warranted close attention, and she thought he was going to do something real with what he carried. She did not need to know specifically what. The something was enough. The enough was the thing James had always known about, that doing it was enough, and the enough came from the doing. She went to bed. She thought before she slept about something James had said once in the kitchen on Cascade Road, on an evening when she had been working on a brief, and he had been reading, and she had said, "I don't know if what we're doing is enough." And he had said, without looking up from the book, "Doing it is enough. The enough comes from the doing." She had been thinking about this sentence across 6 years, and it had a different meaning each time, and tonight it meant this: the folding table on Thursdays is enough. Philip Hartley called Patricia Chen the morning after the gala. He asked for the names of every member of the service staff who had worked the event. Patricia listened to the full request before responding. She said, "All of them?" He said all of them. She asked if there was a specific concern. He said no concern. "I want to learn their names." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I'll send you the full roster." He thanked her. The roster had 31 names on it. She sent it within the hour. She thought when she sent it about the conversation near the south wall and the pause that had contained something she had not yet been able to fully name. She thought about 15 years of event management and every request she had received in those 15 years, and whether any of them had produced an outcome like this one, which was a man calling the morning after a gala, asking for 31 names because he wanted to learn them. She thought probably not. She thought that this was an outcome that required a very specific set of circumstances to produce. Marcus ran into Gloria 4 weeks after the gala at the community center on Donald Lee Hollowell Parkway. She was there for a monthly program review meeting with the Foundation's community staff, which were the meetings she now attended in person rather than through the executive director, which was one of the things that had changed since the keynote. He was there because his day off had taken him, without quite intending it, to the street where his brother's heart had been saved on a Thursday afternoon. They saw each other in the lobby. She said his name. He said he hadn't known she would be here. She said she was here every month now. He looked at the building for a moment. He said, "I want to tell you something." She said, "Go ahead." He said, "Isaiah called last week. He wants to work in the communities, after graduation, to use what he knows in the neighborhoods, in the gap, in the place where the work is." Gloria looked at him. She said, "Tell him to call me." Marcus said, "He'll want to earn it." She said, "I know, so will I." He looked at her. She said, "The Foundation runs on people who believe the work is worth doing and who are willing to do it without requiring certainty about the outcome. Tell him that. Tell him that's the only requirement." He nodded. She said, "That's the whole requirement." He said he would tell him. She said, "And Marcus?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Thank you for watching the room." He said, "I always will." She said, "I know. That's why I said it." They parted in the lobby. She went to her meeting. He went out into the December afternoon, which was Atlanta doing what Atlanta does in winter. Cold enough to need a jacket and clear enough to see the sky a deep blue that the summer never quite manages, as though the cold clarifies something about the blue that the heat obscures. He walked home. He thought about Isaiah. He thought about the rooms ahead of him and what he was going to do in them. He thought about watching. In the spring, Isaiah Calloway Webb graduated from Georgia State University with a degree in electrical engineering. He was the first person in his family to earn a college degree. His mother was there, and Marcus was there, and 3 people from the community center on Donald Lee Hollowell Parkway, who had known Isaiah since he was 12, were there, and Sandra Reeves pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand after the ceremony without explanation. He unfolded it. It had a name and a phone number. He knew the name. He called on a Tuesday. He said he was ready. The conversation lasted 45 minutes, which was not a hiring conversation and not an interview. It was a conversation between 2 people who understood what the work was and what it required, and who were determining whether they were going to do it together. Which it turned out they were, because the understanding was the same and the requirement was the same, and Isaiah Webb was exactly the kind of person the Foundation had always needed without having been able to say so publicly. He started in September. He worked in the communities the Foundation served, bringing an engineer's precision to the infrastructure problems of the Community Health Clinic on Joseph E. Boone Boulevard, which had been running on aging wiring the building inspector had flagged twice, and that had gone unaddressed because the money for it had not existed until a foundation grant made it exist. He fixed the wiring. He fixed other things. He showed up on Thursdays. He learned the names of everyone in the building. He did not need to be told to. Marcus came to see him on his first Thursday. He brought coffee from the corner shop, and they stood outside the clinic and drank it and looked at the building and said very little, which was not because there was nothing to say, but because some things are better held in silence than spoken into something smaller than they are. And they were both people who knew when the holding was more honest than the speaking. They stood with the coffee and the December morning and the building and what it held. Gloria was in her office on Peachtree Street on Isaiah's first Thursday. She did not know he was at the clinic on Boone Boulevard. She did not need to know. She was reviewing a grant report. She knew the work was happening. She knew that somewhere in Atlanta on a Thursday afternoon, a person who had been given something was using what he had been given in the place it was needed, and the knowing was sufficient, which was the thing James had always said, and that she had taken 14 years to understand from the inside, where the understanding was most complete. From the inside was the only way to understand it fully. 14 years of funding from outside the room had been real and had produced real things, and she did not diminish those years. But the 3 years inside the room had given her something the outside had not, which was the specific human weight of what the money became when it hit the ground, the folding table, and the Thursday afternoon, and the grandmother with the referral paper in both hands, and the young man with the degree showing up on his first day because someone had believed he was exactly what the work was for. She had been right to believe it without certainty, which was the only way to believe things that have not yet happened, and then the things had happened, and the belief had turned out to be accurate, and the accuracy was not satisfaction, and was not triumph, and was not the end of anything. It was the next piece of information. The work continued. The folding tables were set up on Thursdays. The rooms held what they held. The chain of specific decisions and specific people extended forward in the way chains extend when the links are strong enough. She worked through the afternoon. The light through the office window on Peachtree Street did what light does in December in Atlanta, which is come in at a low angle that makes the ordinary surfaces of things look considered, look like they have been thought about. She worked in it with the full attention of someone for whom the details are where the intention lives, and she carried what she carried in the space she had for carrying it, which was James, present every day in the forward motion of the thing he had asked her to build when he said, "I think we give it away." She had given it away. She was still giving it. She intended to keep giving it. This was not a decision she reviewed. It was a thing she was, the way you become a thing when you have done it long enough and truly enough that the doing and the being are no longer separate. She was the work the way James had been the work, and the work was going on. And on any given Thursday afternoon in Atlanta, there was a folding table set up at 1 o'clock by someone who knew what to look for. And the looking was happening, and the finding was happening, and the chain was extending. If this story moved something in you, share it with one person today. One person who is doing the work nobody sees. One person who needs to hear that the inside of the room is where the real thing lives, and that the real thing is worth doing even when no one knows you are doing it, and that the knowing eventually comes, and that the coming of it is not the point, but is not nothing either. Subscribe to this channel. There is another story waiting, and I promise it is worth your time. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one. And that the knowing eventually comes, and that the coming of it is not the point, but is not nothing either. Subscribe to this channel. There is another story waiting, and I promise it is worth your time. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.